All right, so I'm going to pull some notes up that I had from last year. Let me find them. All right, so first of all, do you know what a slack variable is? Do you understand what a slack variable is? What is it?
Isn't it the variable like whenever you're doing an equation that you I know it is.
Okay, it's much more basic than that. I mean, I don't want to go talk about variables. If I make a cake and I have 3 cups of flour on hand and it takes 2 cups, I have 1 cup left over, that's a slack variable. It's my leftovers. So it's whatever I use that I have left over when I'm done. That's a slack variable. Okay. All right, so first we're going to set up a table and then we're going to introduce slack variables. Okay. So the first thing you do, what I like to do is set up a table. Yeah. And what goes on top here is what I'm selling or making, whatever. What I'm selling or making. And what goes on this side, the rows here, is what I'm using to make it. In other words, my resources. Okay? So I make myself a little table. The things on top are what I'm selling. They're going to be my X1, X2, and the resources, what I'm using to make them, go in the rows. All right, so we're going to show you how this table is set up, and we're going to get to the point where we can set up a table. All right, so it says a convenience store sells 23 sodas one afternoon in 12, 16, and 20 ounce. I'm going to underline that. Small, medium, and large. The total volume of soda sold was 376 ounces. And they give you the prices. Sorry, for small, medium, and large. Okay. So it's prices and total sales. Okay. So now when I make a chart, what I'm going to do, what am I selling? I'm selling small, medium, and large sodas, right? So this would be my columns. All right. In your 1324 class, this was what they call X1, X2, and X3, right? Rather than X, Y, and Z. Okay. So the 23 is a total. 16 is the volume, 12, 16, and 20. And then the total volume they gave me was 376. See, I just make a column out of that. And the prices were $1, $1.25, and $1.40. And the total sales were $28.45. Okay, by setting up this table, I can just read straight across to get the constraints. I read across the rows. So basically, if I look at this first row, I would say X1 plus X2 plus X3, that equals 23. See, I'm just reading across the row to get it. Okay. I read the second row. 12X1 plus 16X2 plus 20X3 equals 376. Okay. Except for you guys are going to be inequalities in a minute. All right. In the third row, 1X plus 1.X1, 1.25X2 plus 1.4X3 is 28.45. See, once I have that table set up, I can just read straight across the rows. All right. And in simplex tableau, this is going to give you all your constraints, but they call your inequalities. They call them constraints.
Why aren't you using X, Y, and Z?
Because as your teacher using X1, X2, and X3, that's why. Okay, for some people it confuses them if I use X, Y, and Z. They're just variables. I could call them X, Y, and Z, but I'm using X1, X2, X3 to stay consistent with what he's doing. Okay? Is that all right? Yeah? Okay. All right, so those are the equations. Now, some of these problems are kind of nice because they give you like a table like this. It's all set up for you mostly, okay? So this problem here, it says, according to agricultural report, the amounts of nitrogen per acre, phosphate per acre, and labor are needed to grow 3 different vegetables. So look at the table they set up so that this is what I'm selling, right? I'm selling vegetables, and this is what I'm needing to make them, nitrogen, phosphate, and labor. All right, so there's my resources, all right? They've given me the table. What's missing is the total column, all right? So I read, a farmer has 280 acres. All right, that's a total. So I'm going to put this here, acres. We're missing that one. He's got 280 total. And I'll call this X1, X2, X3. 39,000 pounds of nitrogen, so that goes there. 32,400 of phosphate. And 1,300 hours of labor. So you see I just filled in the columns, right? And this is going to give me my constraints. So I have at most that much available, right? So with simplex tableau, instead of using equal, use less than or equal, all right? So I would say for the first equation, 120x1 plus 150x2 plus 170x3 is 39,000. Oh, no, it's less than or equal. Now we're writing the constraints, right? So now we're just going to say less than or equal. 140x1 plus 100x2 plus 80x3 is less than or equal to 80. Is that right? No, 32.4, sorry. Is that right? Yeah. All right, then labor. 4.8x1 plus 4.4x2 plus 4.6x3 is less than or equal to 1,300, right? And the acreage, that's just x plus y plus, is x plus, yeah, so x1 plus x2 plus x3, the total acreage that I grow my vegetables on has to be less than or equal to 280. So what I've just written here are all the constraints for the problem, all right? Just by setting up a table, I have an organized way of looking at them, okay? Now, before I go any further, what you guys are doing is you're going to turn the inequalities into equalities using slack variables. Slack variable is what's left over. So for this first equation, it's talking about nitrogen. So S1 is going to be the leftover nitrogen. S2 is going to be the leftover phosphate. S3 is the leftover labor. And S4 would be the leftover acreage. All right? So you're adding something to turn it into an equality. Let me check something here. What? Hold on. Where are you? No, I'm sorry, I'm trying to look at the chat and it's, chat doesn't want to always come up. Sometimes it does. Is it over here? No. Where's that chat?
They were just asking if this stuff was on our test or if it's just the other test.
No, this is help for 1324, right? Because this is not, you know, what's on your test is what's on your reviews, right? You guys look at the reviews? Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that's what's on your test, right? I'm doing this because I know that kids struggle with it. So I want to make sure that you have a little bit of experience setting them up. All right. So yes, thank you. It's not on the test. All right. So all you do is for each one of these constraints, you add a slack variable. So like I would, to make it an inequality, I'd say like 120x1 plus 150x2 plus 170x3 plus a slack variable, I call it S1. That's the extra leftover, whatever the first one is, 39,000, right? I turn it into an equality, all right? For the second equation, I add S2, right? So.
You put S2 like S3 for each.
Right, for each one of the constraints, S1, S2, S3, however many you have,
Right.
okay? All right.
So with the slack variable, like if you're doing like the argumentative matrix or whatever it's called, like on the calculator,
Yeah, what about it?
like what would you put for S1 since it doesn't have available? Just
We're gonna show you how to set up that matrix in a minute, okay? We put a 1 for that variable, all right? So I'll show you that in a minute, okay? All right, so 4.8x1 plus 44x2 plus 4.6x3 plus S3 equals 1,300. And then I got x1 plus x2 plus x3 plus S4 equals 280. All right, so for each one of those equations, you add the slack variable, the leftovers, S1, S2, S3, whatever, how many you need. Okay? So I just want you to get that idea down, and then we're going to talk about how to set up a matrix. All right, you good with that? Sorry, I need to take a break to take water. I've been talking for 2 hours. Much better. All right. Okay, so now let's let's work a problem where we have to set up a table. All right. So I'm gonna now show you a problem where you're gonna set up a table. All right. So it says, and then we'll talk about how to set up the matrix in a minute. It says a pottery shop makes two kinds of planters, glazed and unglazed. That is what you are making and selling. So that goes on the top. See, that goes on the top of the columns. Okay. The glazed type requires half an hour to throw in the wheel and half an hour in the kiln. So here's my resources, right? Yes, the wheel and the kiln. And this is X1, we'll call this X2. All right. All right. So let's fill in the chart. All right, the glazed tape takes a half hour on the wheel, so this would be a half here, and 1 hour in the kiln. See how I fill it in? And unglazed tape takes 1 hour on the wheel and 6 hours on the kiln. All right, see, I'm just filling in the table. Make a total column. Okay, that's what you have available. Let's see, I did this one. The wheel is available for at most 8 hours per day. That's a total. And the kiln for at most 20 hours per day. So now that I have this, right, I can write my two, constraints, right? So I just read across the rows. So 1/2 X1 plus X2 is less than or equal to 8, right? And then I would have X1, 1X1 plus 6X2 is less than or equal to 20. Okay? Now, if I wanted to add slack variables, how many slack variables would I have? 3? How many equations do I have?
Oh, you have 2 equations.
2, right? So it's just going to be 2. All right, so if I set up slack variables, I have S1 and S2. Okay? All right. So now we're going to work this problem. I'm sorry, can I take, you guys are 20 feet away from me. Can I take this off? It's just, I'm like, ugh. All right, so I'm going to work this problem all the way through. We're going to set up a problem, and then we're going to set up the matrix, and we're going to do simplex tableau on it, okay? So we're going to set this all the way up. So let's read it. A furniture manufacturer makes 2 types of furniture, chairs and sofas. That's what I'm making. That's what goes on the top of my table, right? So chairs and sofas. So this would be X1 and X2. The production of the chairs and sofas requires 3 operations: carpentry, finishing, and upholstery. Those are my resources. Okay, so they go over here. Carpentry, finishing, and upholstery. All right, see, I'm setting up this beautiful table. I'm going to have a total column. All right, so now I've got a table. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to start filling in the table. Manufacturing a chair, so that's this one, requires 3 hours of carpentry. I'm going to put 3 there, 9 hours of finishing, and 2 hours of upholstery. Okay. Let's see. I do that. Yeah, I did that. I did that. All right. Manufacturing a sofa requires 2 hours of carpentry, 4 hours of finishing, and 10 hours of upholstery. I'm just filling in the numbers now. The factory has allocated at most 66 labor hours for carpentry, so that's a total, right? Total carpentry. 180 hours for finishing. This would be the total finishing, right? And 200 hours for upholstery. Okay? So from this, I can get all of my constraints, my inequalities. Okay? Now, here's what this bottom line is: the profit per chair. I want to maximize my profit. That's what they call the objective. All right, it's what I want to maximize. So the profit is not a constraint, but I'm going to write it here anyways. Profit is $90 per chair and $75 per sofa. Okay, that's my objective. We deal with that a little differently. So let's get all the constraints first. So if I just read across the rows, it's 3x1 plus 2x2. I'm going to add a slack variable, right? So how do I do that now? So the first slack variable would be the leftover carpentry, right? This is like S1, S2, S3, right? Just to get it. So plus the leftover carpentry equals 66. Is that all right? Second equation, 9x1 plus 4x2 plus the second slack variable would equal 180. All right. And then the third equation would be the third, so it's 2x1 plus 10x2 plus the third slack variable, the leftover upholstery, equals 200. All right. So what I've just set up are all my constraints that are going to go in my matrix. All right. Now the profit goes in the bottom line of the augmented matrix. All right. And so what you do with the profit is what they call Z, and it's 90x1 plus 75x2. Right? All right. So to use it in the matrix, you're going to move everything over to one side and set it equal to 0. So you're going to keep Z as positive. You're going to move x1 and x2 over. All right. So if I move these over to the other side, I get negative 90x1 minus 75x2 plus Z equals 1 equals 0. Okay. So this is my objective. This goes in the bottom row. Okay. Bottom. You must have it set to 0, and you got to have the negative x1 and x2 in there. All right, now we're going to set up the augmented matrix. Okay? So with the matrix, everything, this has to go in the bottom row. These guys have to go above it, right? So you just put in the coefficients. So I've got 3 slack variables. What I like to do is right above it. So I've got x1, x2, and I've got 3 slack variables, s1, s2, s3. And then you put Z as your profit, and you put your answer over here. Okay, and this is how I set up the matrix. Okay, so the first equation, x1 is 3, x2 is 2, s1 is 1, because there's like a coefficient of 1 out front. S2 and 3 are 0, Z is 0, and the answer is 66. See how I set that up? That's the first row. Second row. 9x1, 4x2, s2 is 1. So the others are 0. And this is 180. Okay, 9. Third row, x1 is 2, x2 is 10, s3 is 1. So everything else is 0. And the answer to that was 200. Okay, so you see right now I have all 3 constraints in the matrix. On the bottom row goes the objective. All right, so on the bottom row, I put a line. So x1 is negative 90, x2 is negative 75, Z is 1, and everything else is 0. Okay, so this is the augmented matrix that I set up. Everybody clear on how to set it? Yeah.
How do you know when to use the slack variable?
You use one slack variable for every inequality that you have. So you see that I had 1, 2, 3 rows in my table. I'm going to have 3 slack variables. So the first one is the leftover carpentry, the second one is the leftover finish, and the third one is the leftover upholstery. So you have 1 slack variable for every equation. Does that answer the question?
Yes, ma'am. Sorry, I wasn't reading into it.
It's the leftover resources, right? That's what it is, okay? So the objective doesn't get a slack variable. All right, so once I have this matrix, that was the hard part. Now we just have to use the program. The way you use the program, yeah, sure, why not? You pick the most negative, the bottom are called indicator. You pick the most negative number on the bottom. So what's the most negative number? Negative 90. So this would be your pivot, what they call pivot column. Okay, that's your pivot column. To get the pivot row, you're going to take each of the answers over here. You're going to divide the answer by the corresponding number in that row. You're going to pick the smallest positive quotient. You're going to divide them, and that's going to be your pivot row. So you're going to take, for example, here you're going to take 200 and you divide it by this guy, which is what, 2? That's going to be 100. I divided them. So here I divide 180 by 9. What's 180 divided by 9? 20. And here I divide 66 by 3, which is 22. So of those 3 numbers, which one is the most small positive one? Huh? The 20, right?
Yeah.
So this would be my pivot row. All right? So in that program, when you use program simplex, you're going to enter this matrix in the matrix A, and you're going to tell it to pivot. You're going to tell it to pivot in row 2, right? And column 1. Okay? And you're going to pivot every time you use that program. As long as you're getting negative numbers, you keep going in the bottom. As soon as all the numbers are positive on the bottom, you stop. Okay? So I did it in my calculator, all right, with your program. Can you guys online, can you see this, the board? If I walk over here. You guys online, can you see these numbers or no? Well,
No.
So we're going to write it down. All right, so I used my calculator, I pivoted. So let's talk about how to read the answers. All right, so when I use my calculator, I think I have to pivot 3 times. And I got the following matrix. 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0. By the way, the notes to 4.2 I did record, they're up on there. Negative 41/13, which would be a better place to start. 75/13. 0, 0, 1, 0. 326. Negative 113. 13. 45/26. And with 0, 0, 0, 1. 18, 10, 18. Okay, so I pivoted multiple times, and this is what I ended up with. Let me label all these. So this was like X1, X2, S1, S2, S3, Z, and this is the answers, right? Okay. You want to look for the rows that, you want a column that has all zeros and a 1. It's called a basic column. If you don't have that, it's going to be 0, all right? So the rows that aren't basic, see how these are not all zeros and a 1? Right? So pretty much what I do is cross that out because that tells me whenever that happens, S1 is 0. All right, so that would tell me I have nothing left over from whatever X1 was, whatever the first resource was. And so let's see, S3, see how that's not basic. It doesn't have zeros and a 1, cross it out. So S3 is 0. So that tells me I have no leftovers of S1 or S3. Okay? Now, with the zeros and ones, each one's going to correspond to something. So when I look at this, what's left, let me write these in order. So this is X1, X2, what do I have left? S2 and Z, right? Okay. So if I look at this row, this tells me that X2, where the row is, X2 is 10. And if I look at this, this is X1. X1 is 18, right? S2 would be 18. It's this, and Z is 2250. That's my maximum profit. So what this tells me is, I think X1 was chairs, right? So I need to make 18 chairs and 10 sofas to maximize my profit. My maximum profit will be 2250. All right? I will have no leftovers of S1 or S3, so I'll have no leftovers of carpentry or upholstery. I will have S2, I'll have a leftover of 18, whatever, 18 hours, and that's your finishing hours. Okay, so that's how you read one of these things. Okay, all right. So let's just look at one more. So if we take the words away, all we're doing is putting equations into a matrix. All right. So I'm going to set up some equations here so you can see how it works. So I want to maximize this. That's the bottom row of the matrix subject to these conditions. So I'm going to use X1 and X2 rather than XY. So the profit is Z is 3X1 plus 5X2, right? Yeah. All right, so in the bottom row, you would move those over so you get, well, I'll write it here. I don't want to get negative 3X1 minus 5X2 plus Z equals 0. So these guys always become negative. All right, that's your bottom row of your matrix. Now, if X is less than 4, that's X1. So I have X1 is less than 4. So I'm going to x1 is less than 4. I'll just write it that way. So the equation with the slack variable would be x1 plus the first slack variable equals 4. So I have a slack variable for every inequality. Okay, is that all right? So this is x2. So I have 2x2 is less than 12. So with the slack variable, it would be 2x2 plus the second slack variable equals 12. For every inequality, I add a slack variable. Now, I'm going to tell you something. Oh, let me do this one. So this one would be 3x1 plus 2x2 is less than or equal to 18. So I add another slack variable, 3x1 plus 2x2 plus the third slack variable equals 18. Okay, that's all I'm writing. If you ever see these in a problem, don't use those as inequalities because x and y are automatically positive. You can't sell a negative number of items, right? So if they're there, ignore them, okay? Because they're unnecessary. All right, so now I'm going to make a matrix out of these. So if you look at this, the first equation is in the first row. So x1 you see is 1, s1 is 1, and the answer is 4. See how they just plug it in? And I'll label x1, x2. I've got 3 slack variables, s1, s2, s3. This is your z. You guys call it z, okay? Then you just fill it in. So the other one would be 2x2, so I put a 2 there, plus s2. So s2 should be 1, and that equals 12, right? The rest of them are zeros, okay? Third equation, 3x1 plus 2x2, and the third slack variable is 1 equals 18, right? And your objective always goes in the bottom row, all right? -3, -5, z is 1, and you always have 0 here, okay? Now you're ready to do your, whatever you call it, pivot. A couple things to notice. You notice the ones always go down diagonally. They should with all zeros if you set it up right. All right, they should always be a 0. Should have some negative numbers here. Okay, so you guys tell me which row would which column would be my pivot column? Second one, because this is the most negative number, right? I would pivot here, and then I'm going to divide each of these, right? So I would take 18 divided by 2, which is 9, and 12 divided by 2, which is 6. Now this one's weird. 4 divided by 0, what's that equal? No, it doesn't equal 0. Right? Try it on a calculator. What happens? You get an error, right? You can't do, so you're going to ignore that one. You can't divide by 0, right? With these quotients, it has to be positive and it has to be defined, right? The smallest positive number. So the smallest positive number I get is 6. So this would be my pivot row. So my program simplex, I would pivot on, this is row 2, column 2, right? Okay, because this would be my pivot item right here. All right, is that all right? Okay. So I think the hard thing about these is you have to kind of accept on faith that it works. There's no like reasoning, it's just a recipe that you're following, right? You're setting up these equations, you're setting up the slack variables, you're using the program to pivot, and then you're reading the answers, okay? As soon as all of these are positive down here, you're done, right? You stop whenever you get all positives. All right, and I'll put this up here. It's a little flow chart for doing that. I borrowed it from me now. But basically, you write your matrix problem down, you write your matrix. Are there any negative indicators? Yes, select the pivot column, select the row, right, from the quotients above the dashed line. Pivot, come back, are there any negative indicators? You keep going until all the things in the bottom are positive, okay? All right. So let's just read one more. So let's say this was the answer I got, all right? So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna look at this, because this is the answer. So I'm gonna look at it, and I got, looks like 2 variables, a couple slack variables, right? This is my maximizing, this is my answer. All right, so first thing I do is look at these guys that aren't basic, right? Because they're not 0, 0, 1, so they're 0. So they're gone. So anything that's not that is 0. okay? So you see I have a 1 here. This 1 corresponds to x1, so I can read the answer that x1 is 6. Here's a 1 here for x2, so x2 would be 3. And this is S1, so S1 is 4. See, I'm going across. Yeah. And then this right here down the bottom, that's your maximum profit. So Z, the maximum profit is $330. Okay. Okay, so here's your X1, go and read across, right? X2, go down, read across. Let's see, S1, go down, read across, right? See, I'm doing that. Profit, go down, read across. Look for the 1. Okay. All right, so that's how you read these things. I hope that helped a little bit. They're hard problems to set up. But try using a table. I think you'll find it better in terms of organizing your work. But it's not the easiest topic, so if they gave you homework on it, get started on it. Okay. Let's see, how much time I have left? Not much. All right, so oh, I have more time than I thought I did. I don't know. Anything else I need to go over? You guys good? Yeah? All right. So study for your test tomorrow, right? You got 21 question test for me, right? And do well, all right? I'll be checking my email tomorrow if there's any troubles. It should be set up and good to go. Your math lab needs to be up and working. You need to have a webcam that's up and working, okay? Go to Honor Lock. The directions for Honor Lock are on the course homepage, okay?
So we can't use scratch paper?
Blank scratch paper and a graphing calculator are allowed, okay? When they do Honor Lock, if you have blank scratch paper, you know, they'll ask you to just hold it up to the camera, show them it's blank. And when you're done taking your test, you know, show up your work, and that's all, okay? All right, and a graphing calculator is allowed, okay? No notes, nothing like that, okay? When you open Honor Lock, you'll get the password for the test, and hopefully it's good to go. I spent a lot of time on that, so, okay? All right, good luck on your test. Have a good weekend, all right? Tomorrow at midnight. Yeah. Maybe you can help me with- And 1321st, we're going to test. Right. I don't understand. All right, so these are just calculator problems. You can plug these in your calculator. Right. So I just, you know, do 3 times this matrix, or minus 2 times. You just plug straight in the calculator. So you're allowed to calculator? Yes. Yeah, so 3 times E, you can do it. Again, you just plug it in and do 3 times E. Okay. Same. Also, now, E times definitely has to be like number 12. Says a thing for you. Right, okay, yeah, let's talk about one. Yeah. So, I'm going to use a special what we call it, when you multiply by ones and diagonals and zeros and rows, it's like multiplying by ones and numbers. Because like if you multiply the rows and so you're doing 5. Yeah. So this is a yeah. All right. So if I roll upon, so you do 4 times 1 is 4 plus 8 is just you do the first or second one. 4 times 2 is 0. You see how it's calculated? And every time it's going to do that. So if I do the second row, first column, 0 and 1 0, like 1 times 0. See how it's just generated? Yeah. So whenever you multiply by that, like 1, you do something. Okay. But you can still plug it in the calculator. Okay. Okay. So all these things, the only one you can't plug in the calculator is the number of variables. Okay, so you actually have to do that in there. Right. All right, so for you, that's going to be a column. So I have variables. I can do that out of the that is so this is what you have to do. So you're going to do first row each column. 5 times 2 is 10, plus 2 times 7 is 6. This is the first row, second column. The first row, second column is 5A. And the same. And then first row, so minus 5 plus 3. All right. And now I do the first row of all the columns, and now I do second. Negative 6 times 2 is negative 12, right? Plus 1. And then this second row, second column, right? So negative 6A. Negative 6 times 1 is 6. Plus 0 will be 1. Okay. Okay. And we have very little in there. Okay, we're going to roll it on.
And then for this one, you just do add them?
Yeah.
Okay. Zero to mountain.
Yeah, so well, now you just look at it, right? So add corresponding elements, so this something that x plus 2 is 10. Okay. So x plus 2 is 10, and that's 8. And here, it's negative 4. No, 2. Yeah, 5. Negative 1 plus 5 is 4. That doesn't tell me anything, right? I need the second element.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do 4 plus 5, right? This is corresponding element. All right.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Sure, no problem. I'm giving him a hard time. Thank you so much. Sure, no problem. Have a good day.